Welcome to the Afterglow podcast, a space to practice Yoga Nidra informed by the ideas of Carl Jung and internal family systems. Each week we will work on a different life theme, giving us the opportunity to discover vast inner landscapes, sitting with all that life has to offer as we explore who we are. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep. Welcome to the very first Afterglow podcast. This is a companion episode and will be followed up with the Yoga Nidra practice in a few days. And to start off this journey, it makes sense to begin by describing what Yoga Nidra is and how I practice it and teach it. And that'll lead us nicely into a very gentle first practice in a few days. And I'm so glad that you're here, and I really look forward to welcoming as many people onto this journey as are interested in this type of work. So let's dive in. Yoga Nidra is a state of consciousness where you achieve semi-wakefulness and semi-sleep, where the conscious and the unconscious mind can meet. If that sounds daunting, I promise you it's extremely relaxing and you're absolutely in control the entire time. And if anything, the worst thing that will happen is that you will fall asleep. The conscious state of Yoga Nidra has been discussed for hundreds and hundreds of years. It appears in books like the Upanishads, the Mahabharata, and certain Buddhist tantric texts. And it was revered as a supreme state of bliss, a state of consciousness that could help us achieve self-realization. Now, in today's practice, we have slightly less lofty goals than self-realization, and we predominantly utilize it as a way to observe ourselves in this life. The persona that we wear, the affects and complexes that we have. And this is done in a not very structured way traditionally. It's predominantly used for relaxation, and then there are some quote-unquote advanced practices where people can explore aspects of themselves, perhaps overcome a phobia or tap into some creative wellspring within themselves. But in the way I run it, in the way I teach Yoga Nidra, and what this Afterglow Yogic practice is going to be teaching is blending Yoga Nidra with Carl Jung's concept of individuation and throwing in some internal family systems ideas to help support the entire structure and make it accessible to anyone. It's an entirely secular process, and it is done with the intention of giving people a very valuable free resource that they can use so that they can be more present in their lives. I have been working with Yoga Nidra and teaching Yoga Nidra for 10 years, and almost immediately from discovering Yoga Nidra, I started laying Jungian concepts on top of it, or threading them through, or however is best to describe it. I couldn't help myself. There's such a natural alchemy between the two, and even if I were to describe Yoga Nidra to any Jungian analyst, they would say, oh, well, that's active imagination, because Jung himself had a process that is so similar to Yoga Nidra. It's basically the exact same thing. The steps are maybe slightly different, and his work focused predominantly on dream work, but it's essentially the same thing. So Jung himself had the same level of appreciation for the state of consciousness and for this type of work. It's a wonderfully relaxing experience. You will feel very calm and soothed by the end of it. When I started doing my training, I immediately started blending Jung, and the Yoga Nidras that I've designed from scratch over the last 10 years all tend to revolve around dealing with life as it comes from a Jungian perspective. And what does that look like? Well, for the most part, it means spending some more time with yourself, sitting with yourself as you go through an experience, keeping yourself company through all that life has to offer. And I can guarantee you now, it's a truly wonderful, rewarding experience. It is potentially daunting to some to hear that, but it really is a very wholehearted, enriched experience. We're sitting with ourselves, that is all. Every now and then we're surprised by what our inner self has to say, and that's wonderful. That means it's working. That means we're successfully accessing our unconscious minds. But for the most part, we're really just sitting with ourselves in a much more profound way than we are ever taught to do in day-to-day life. And it's an incredibly simple tool, and that's why I want to now give more people access to this free and wonderful resource, and they can build their own skill set from it. And that's why each week we'll move through different themes. If I was working one-on-one, I could give people, tailored Yoga Nidra to support something that they're specifically dealing with. But as far as this podcast goes, I want this to eventually build up to being a huge catalog of many, many different things that anybody could be going through. I'm trying to balance it out between collective experiences, and what that means is perhaps there is something going on globally that is something that we could all sit with, that we could all face together. For example, something like, the climate crisis, for example. That's a global issue. Yes, it affects us personally, ultimately, but it's definitely that is a collective, part of the collective psyche, as opposed to the individual. Then there will also be things that are more typically going to impact everyone, because it's a natural theme in life that almost every single person will have to go through. So maybe it's working to figure out what your dream vocation is, what your purpose is in life. That's something that we all have to go through. Perhaps it's helping with bereavement. Perhaps it's helping with the experience of aging. These are things that are just standard for everyone. Perhaps they're more suitable at a different time in your life, but they're generally applicable. And then I also want to do some more sort of particular niche Yoga Nidras that will focus more on certain groups. For example, I want to do some work to support women who've had miscarriages. for people who've had miscarriages, and also for their partners. I also have worked with people with cancer, and obvious disclaimer, in no way does Yoga Nidra cure cancer, and I would never claim to, and of course always seek medical advice for anything. However, what it can do is that it can offer profound support to your psyche, to your deeper unconscious mind as you're going through a very traumatic experience. So there are certain things that are specific to niche groups, some things that are more relevant to everyone, and then there are things that are part of the collective that as a culture we are experiencing. And I'm going to get creative with that because sometimes it's not as obvious as it might seem. And I think that in terms of the work being done on individuation, it's really important to know where we begin and end, and where the collective begins and ends, and that we don't over-identify too much with overculture and with certain elements of the collective. I think that we're in a sort of state of crisis where, due to social media, we're just doing that constantly. So it's really good to have these moments where we can separate ourselves a little bit and give ourselves some healthy emotional distance and psychic distance from some of these things that are happening in the broader overculture, while also being able to genuinely feel the emotions that come with it. It's exactly this type of collective work that I think is sorely lacking in today's culture, because we have to contend with so much sadness in the news, and we're constantly being bombarded, and I think everyone's feeling compassion fatigue, and their nervous systems are shut, and becoming increasingly apathetic, and they don't want any of those things. They want to be able to constantly feel and be moved by the world, but that's also completely not possible for anyone, no matter how much you care. And so it's with these collective yoga nidras that I hope to give people the opportunity to sit consciously with an event or an experience that as a culture we're going through, and give it its due attention, feel its due feelings, and also find the separation between the individual and the collective, and understand where we begin and end, and where the world's problems begin and end, and understand what we can do and what we can't do. And I think that that is also going to go a long way to helping not be so overwhelmed when it comes to sitting with ourselves, and when it comes to needing to sift through all of these very delicate layers of self, and understanding this is mine, this is the collective's, and this is a part of the collective that I really identify with, and this is a part of the collective that people want me to identify with, and I refuse because it is not me. And that is just a journey that takes a bit of time and a bit of practice, but it's absolutely possible, and so actually readily available once we just develop the habit of sitting with ourselves on a regular basis. And so because all of these things are very heady and big emotions, and everything is should be done in moderation, and so I am also going to be regularly threading through body appreciation yoga nidras. So that is a yoga nidra where the entire thing is just about focusing on the body. It will be slightly different each time, but essentially moving through the body, which is actually one of the yoga nidra steps, but it's taking one of the steps to take you into that state of consciousness, and it's making that the entire yoga nidra practice. And it is wonderful, it is rejuvenating, it is really important, and it just pays the body a lot of attention and gives it a lot of gratitude, plus something else that will differ from each one, and make it unique, and a way to just alleviate the mind, so that we're spending time with ourselves in different ways, and it's not all just some very intense inner work. And the same goes for just playfulness. So some weeks the work will be playful and creative, and attempting to try and instigate some sense of fun and lightness. Equally, there will also be interspersed episodes of inner child work. So in my experience, it's not really an inner child, it's many dozens of inner children, but it doesn't sort of sound right in English to say to spend time with our inner children. Maybe it's a cultural thing, but it just doesn't seem to land on the ear well. So we'll say inner child work, but just know that it's almost never just one inner child. You're going to be meeting yourself at many different ages and different experiences, and I find that is such profound work. It's so valuable, that it should be done more regularly as a way to continually check in, and it can also be incredibly fun. Admittedly, at the beginning, it tends to be quite an emotional experience, but quite quickly, children just want to play. So once they get tended to and all of their needs are met, it's an enormously fun process. And yeah, but unfortunately, because we tend to neglect these sides of ourselves, the play is much harder to achieve. So hopefully with some regular inner child work, we can get to that wonderful state of play. So I'm just going to now run through a few questions that people typically ask around Yoga Nidra, and hopefully that will answer some of the questions that you might be having right now. So what to expect? So as I mentioned, each week we'll have a different theme. I will have 2 episodes per week, a companion episode like this one now, where I will be, it's kind of like a primer. It's helping give you a good context to what the Yoga Nidra is going to be doing, why it's important, why it's valuable. It'll leave you with some questions that you can sit with for a day or two to try and best prepare yourself so that you come into the Yoga Nidra having already digested some of the information and made it your own. Of course, anything can happen in the state of Yoga Nidra. You can suddenly think, actually, no, I really want to go in a different direction, and that's always great, and follow that gut feeling. But I promise you, the introspection beforehand and the descriptions that I'll take you through as part of the companion episode are not done in for no reason. They really will help deepen the experience and give you in much more context as to why this is so much more profound than it could seem on the surface, and how to get the most out of it. So that companion episode will change obviously each week, because each week the theme will change. And then the second episode is the actual Yoga Nidra episode, and that will be 2 or maybe 3 days after the companion episode is released. And the Yoga Nidra episode, you can expect to find a quiet place where nobody will disturb you. Put your phone on silent, and I will take you through the steps to gently guide you into the state of Yoga Nidra. You'll be very comfortable, very relaxed, aware and awake. Some people ask if it's like if they're hypnotized, and they're not. And some people want to know if they're going to remember it or if they're in control. You will remember everything unless you fall asleep, and you're absolutely in control the entire time. It's just helping to ease you into a state of extreme relaxation. And some people sort of are not really sure if it's working, or if they're in it or not in it. And I always say the same thing, which is just don't worry about it. You'll be relaxed enough, it's fine. You'll figure out for yourself when you're in the state and when you're not in the state. Ideally, you feel comfortable and at ease. And one of the IFS therapists that I've been to described the process of IFS in the same way, which is that you know it's working because you're surprised by what you see. And that's all. It's very gentle. It's slightly like you're dreaming, but you're a bit more awake than you would be if you were dreaming. And the images are very pleasant. Every now and then, I might encourage you to, or the visualization prompt I give you might encourage you to feel some slight discomfort, like thirst, or maybe your feet are sort of stuck in the mud a little bit, but that's not done for no reason. It's to deepen the experience, and it's a symbolic prompt. It's trying to encourage you to feel that discomfort, so that when you feel the relief, it's all the more valuable. Is this practice the same as lucid dreaming? And I would say essentially yes. Yoga Nidra is the same state of consciousness of being semi-awake, semi-asleep. There are some notable differences in that you start Yoga Nidra from being awake, whereas lucid dreaming, you're starting it from being asleep. Also, at least in terms of most modern day Yoga Nidra, you're almost always guided. Of course, you can practice it on your own and be self-guided. That's completely fine. That's how I do it most of the time. So that's also great. Of course, the practice that we're doing here is very much through a focus on Jungian individuation. But, much like lucid dreaming or active imagination or Yoga Nidra, any of these things can be used for fun, just to play. We can fly over the ocean as though we were an entire flock of birds. We can do that as easily in Yoga Nidra as we can in lucid dreaming. So in short, I would say yes, it is the same. What we're doing here is very much about the drive and the goal for doing inner work and sitting with ourselves as a part of a greater practice of individuation. And then one of the other questions is it similar to active imagination? And again, I would say it's essentially the exact same thing. The steps that guide you in are different, but those steps are not the state of consciousness that is being achieved. They are a method to settle into it. The state itself is exactly the same. Active imagination, capital A, capital I, is in psychology, it's a Jungian method whereby the practitioner enters into a state of consciousness holding both the conscious and the unconscious, exactly like Yoga Nidra and internal family systems. Active imagination requires that we restrain the conscious mind from what I call the script writing, and instead it allows for a space for unconscious mind to communicate. And this takes some getting used to and requires some patience, but like I mentioned before, you are allowing the unconscious to come through when you are surprised by what is being expressed. Also, like what I mentioned before, active imagination does tend to be primarily, or at least it was designed primarily for dream interpretation, which is absolutely something I will explore through this platform and give you the opportunity to dive into as well. Jung does warn of the dangers of active imagination, and I guess the same goes for Yoga Nidra. People with regular psychosis or hallucinations or paranoid delusions, they should not do these practices. They are already too much in their own inner world, and they should spend less time there. So some types of depression have the same requirement. There may not be any sense of psychosis, but if you're spending too much time deep within yourself, the medicine that is best suited tends to be physical activity, getting outside, engaging with the outer world. So nobody should ever suggest that any one method is suitable for everyone, absolutely everyone. That would be irresponsible and untrue. So ultimately, if you do the practice and it's not feeling relaxing and nice, and you'll end up feeling I don't know, maybe a bit anxious, or just sort of it's just not sitting right with you, then you can try it again another time, just in case you were just having a funny day, or try it again in a few years, or it's just not for you, and that's absolutely completely okay. I myself went through over a year of not doing Yoga Nidra because it's just what my system needed. I was too internal at the time, not even because of Yoga Nidra, but because of other things. And I needed to be in the outer world. I needed to not be thinking about what was happening in my inner world. And eventually, when I was ready, I was able to come back to it, and it was immensely rewarding. And I had a greater sense of self-awareness and understanding of how it all sort of fits together for me personally. And so any of these practices, if they don't make you feel good, don't do them. It's as simple as that. That being said, in my years of teaching, 10 years of teaching, 99.9% of the people I've taught have found the experience to be incredibly soothing and relaxing, and have ultimately had just only positive experiences from it. Another question I get asked a lot is whether or not Yoga Nidra is a meditation practice. I would say no, it's not, but I'm also not in the business of making definitive statements as to what what meditation is. I think that across cultures, across religious and spiritual practices, and translation and language usage, I think it would be next to impossible to create a global definition of meditation that fits everyone. However, broadly speaking, within yogic schools of thought, Yoga Nidra as it's practiced today is not a meditation practice. One could imagine that hundreds of years ago, the way in which Yoga Nidra was done, it could be considered a meditation, and it was in fact referred to as a meditation, with the goal of achieving self-realization. Today, we would not say that the average person who's practicing Yoga Nidra is trying to do that. And if one were interested in doing that, I would suggest first and foremost that they find a trusted teacher. However, typically with meditation, we're trying to empty our mind either through a single point of focus. Again, this is not true of all meditation, but typically within yoga lineages, we're trying to empty the mind. Whereas with Yoga Nidra, we are actively encouraging ourselves and each other to engage with the material of our minds. So it's entirely different from that perspective. You'll probably wonder why at this point people will sometimes advertise Yoga Nidra as a meditation, and the answer is it's easy to describe it as a meditation. If you're trying to explain a new concept to somebody who has no idea what it is, and you've got limited time to do it, or limited word space to do it, so then it's just a case of grabbing words that are already presumably a part of people's vocabulary. And yes, it does mean that it adds to broader misconceptions as to what meditation is, and some people are very frustrated about that, and I understand their position. I also understand the position of people who are trying to explain things simply to people, knowing that they have limited time to do it, and there's no perfect system. I have opted for meditation for that reason, and I think that ultimately, if people really want to know, they ask, and they're always interested and grateful for further insight. So there's a touch of insight for now. You may be wondering if you need to know anything about Carl Jung or internal family systems, IFS. And the answer is absolutely, you do not need to know anything. I will explain anything that you do need to know. I will explain in the companion episode before the Yoga Nidra. So you will be getting a gentle and mild education into the work of Carl Jung, and a little bit of IFS as well. Although IFS is not nearly as broad or as deep a school as Carl Jung, so there's much more to learn and to chew on when it comes to Jungian concepts and ideas. But yes, I will explain everything that you need to know, and I always opt for easy, relatable language style. It's not the same as saying I'm dumbing it down, because that's not what I'm doing. It's that Jungian analysts' books are so incredibly dense and really not ultimately for practitioners. They're for other analysts. And I am not an analyst. I hope to one day train to be a Jungian analyst, but until that day comes, I have to spend a lot of time understanding what I'm reading in these books to make it accessible for my brain and also for me to use in day-to-day life. In addition, I am in Jungian therapy and have been on and off for several years, and I have partially engaging conversations with therapists as in terms of different schools of thought when it comes to Jung. And I say partially engaging because sometimes I'm not sure that they're as engaged as I am in picking apart all of these things. Yeah. Essentially, you don't need to know anything. I will guide you easily through everything you need to know, and I present it as very digestible information. If I do, I think most likely as these podcasts go on, I will probably start to use words so often that you'll get sick and tired of me describing them for new listeners. And I think you're more at risk of that than anything else. So you'll be fine to know nothing. Equally, if you already know a substantial amount about Jung, fantastic. That's absolutely great, and undoubtedly you're looking forward to being in this space more often, because who doesn't love Jung? Getting ready to close off this first companion episode, I want to leave you with some idea of what to expect from the first Yoga Nidra episode that I will upload in a couple of days. So firstly, it will be incredibly easy. To help you get into the vibe of Yoga Nidra, I will lead you through the steps and then prompt you to find yourself in a space that is entirely your own. No one can access it, and it can look and feel exactly how you want it to. This is to establish a space that is like a safe harbor, a place for you to go in waking life or in Yoga Nidra, and is a perfect little refuge. If you have a spiritual teacher or a deity that you would like to invoke, be it a guru, it could be the Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Hashem, Shiva, anyone that you like. It can be an author you really love. They can be your personal guru. In traditional Yoga Nidra speak, we would call it an Ishta Devata, your favorite being or deity. So if you're not comfortable with this idea of having a form that you visualize, then I would recommend invoking the concept of Mother Nature. It's a powerful image. It has a powerful force. And while it doesn't take a human form, and I will be describing their eyes, I request that you extend some creative license when it comes to imagining the eyes of Mother Nature and see what comes up for you. Equally, if you're comfortable having the physical form of a being or a deity that you want to maybe spend the next day or two thinking who would that be, then I encourage you to do that as well. In Jungian language, we would refer to this as the numinous, but I'm purposefully not going too into detail about this now, because in next week's episode I'm going to be talking about the numinous in more detail. Essentially, sit with the idea of a higher power. If you feel discomfort with it being a physical form of a spiritual being or deity, then I encourage you to take on the concept of Mother Nature and embrace it and sit with how that feels over the next day or two. I'll leave you with a quote for anyone who is still uncertain as to what it may look like to have an inner guide, an inner being or deity to support you, to look to for comfort. It's a quote by Charan Singh the previous master of the Radhaswami Satsang Bias practice in Punjab, and he says, "May your love of the form culminate in the love of the formless."